this joint meeting of the Anchorage Assembly and the Anchorage School District to order.
But not in this.
First order of business is roll call. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
She's home.
Ms. Timbowski is on the telephone. Great, thank you, Ms. Timbowski. Mr. Evans?
Here.
Mr. Flynn is out of town and has to be excused. Mr. Hall?
Present.
Mr. Honeman?
Here.
Ms. Johnston? Here. Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Starr? Mr. Steele?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. School Board?
Mr. Brisbane?
Here.
Ms. Plunkett? Mr. Croft?
Here.
Ms. Davis? Mr. Higgins?
Yes.
Here's Walkdale.
Just stay present. Huh?
Stay present.
Never mind, he's here.
Here. Ms. Snelling? Here.
I missed something.
They just did your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Pat Higgins, school board. Now I get to sit. Thank you.
We've been joined by the mayor. And next item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Tim, would you do
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. We have minutes for a previous meeting of December 11th, 2015. We need a motion on approving the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes, our corrected minutes.
Second.
That's unanimous. Not seeing an objection, those minutes are approved. Before we get down to the agenda, Mr. Mayor, anything from the mayor's office?
No, I think it's a pleasure to see everybody join here together in a common cause. I know that we are looking at some challenging times coming out of Juneau. My general response is not to curl up like a sow bug and let it happen to us, and instead we ought to come out and swing it. So I'm glad to see that we're doing it together.
Thank you, Mayor. Agenda, is there anything anybody wants to add to the agenda, or we're gonna follow the agenda? Is there anything anybody wants to add? Yes?
If we have time, I think we should address maybe the increase as far as, or the decrease
Decrease?
in the state
Right, allocation?
allocation as far as services. On behalf of.
We'll add that on. Is there anything else that Vice was into that, needs added? Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And we go down to first item 6A, MOASD fiscal year as requested by Assembly Member, Assembly Chair, Vice Chair Gray Jackson. Elby, are you on the line? Okay. Then we may have to pick this up in the next meeting. Jennifer?
Do you know what she was it
Well, she was trying to see
plan?
if it would make sense to go ahead and try and adjust the school,
Oh, the school
budget.
MOA,
year,
the fiscal year, okay.
Right. So, we've talked about it numerous times. Barbara?
Mr. Chair, I believe that there was a committee that discussed this topic, a joint committee last year before your December 12th meeting, and I know Ms. Johnston was on that committee, is that correct?
Ms. Johnston?
Yes, that was correct, and actually this was just one of many items that we discussed with my as far as savings funds. And it's one that comes up every
You're
year.
on it, right?
And it could be looked at.
Mr. Holman?
I forgot to request, Mr. Chair, if we have time for the add on the agenda, guns on campus, the bill is going before the legislature and.
Is that ASD done on campus?
No, but there's, KCC is right behind the UAH main campus, and also there are some events where high school students are attending the UAH and trying to. Plus, just a quick discussion on the safety and security.
We've got time on that, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go to 6B, FY 2016-2017 budget. Superintendent, I think that's your item.
Yep, it is, thank you, Chairman Training. So what we are gonna be doing on Tuesday is presenting the budget to the Assembly for approval. Budget's based on what's in statute, the governor's budget, and we're faced hopefully with an $11 million gap that we have for our general fund for the 16-17 school year. We work closely with the school board always to determine what our budget should look like, and this year was no different. We engaged in a lot of public dialogue and conversation, feedback through online platform, in person, and several meetings, as well as public testimony opportunities. So, given the nature of our budget, where we have about 89% of our costs being in people, we end up having to address this $11 million gap through people. And for the last several years, we've been able to hold our classroom relatively harmless in terms of having to make reductions in the classroom. We're unable to do that with this budget that we're presenting. We have about 49 reductions in our staff and teaching positions, including direct classroom instruction, as we're adjusting our pupil-teacher ratio by 1 student in the classroom. We've also reduced another 7.5 positions through assistant principals, maintenance, and central services staff. In addition to those reductions, we've made some add-backs. We've added about 13, almost 14 positions for special education, our English language learner, teaching assistants, as well as charter schools. We added back 3 positions for administrative and custodial staff. So we've had some trade-offs, some reductions and some add-backs, and ultimately, we're presenting a budget that addresses that gap. I also want to give you some background information. You can see the little handout that was provided. It gives you the history of what we've done over the last 3 years and includes this year as well. We have about a 22% increase in our positions for central support services. And we hear a lot of feedback from the public about making reductions to central office, and we've done that over the course of the last 3 years to a point where I think we have gone to bare bones. And you can see also, if you look at the bottom row where it has direct classroom instruction, the reduction we're making with those positions is percentage-wise small, but it's still going to have an impact on our schools and our students. So with that, I'll answer any questions assembly members might have regarding the budget that will be before you on Tuesday night for approval.
Thank you. I think we have a few questions for you. One question I have for you is exactly how many teachers are we losing that have direct impact on the students?
So the direct classroom reduction, Mr. Training, will be about 48, almost 49 positions. And that's with the class size adjustment as well as support for special education, ELL gifted. We made a reduction to one of our teachers in the Ignite program.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Johnston and then Mr. Holman.
As far as your central support services and your decrease there, what's the overall employment in central support?
The number of positions?
Yeah.
I don't have that information right now. I have to get that.
And how many is this decrease?
For the last 3 years, we've had about a 22% decrease in our positions and how we've categorized central support services. So that's business management, human resources, curriculum and instruction, communications, building operations.
So you don't have numbers for me as far as number of people?
Let's see if Mr. Ratliff has.
Sure.
And I could look it up maybe.
Sure. In 2013, we had about 354 FTE in those categories supporting those services. Now we're down to about 275 positions.
And do you know how many in that 275 are funded other than by general fund?
These are all general fund positions.
These are all general, so these aren't.
Yeah, these don't have any grants or other food service transportation funds in there. It's all general fund.
Thank you.
Mr. Holman.
Pretty much that was what my question was. I see the percentage decrease. I I get that, but it's kind of hard to follow the graph down below, so it'd be not helpful for some numbers specific. And again, I apologize not having an actual budget, or, but I'm curious to know. So that was one question. And I guess that'll.
Okay, well, we'll have to, I don't know that we have Mr. Ratliff has all that information available right now, but we'll certainly get that to you.
But to follow up on that, were these positions eliminated through attrition, or were there any actual people lost as a result of saying go away?
Over the last 3 years, it's been a combination of things. Obviously, when we have to reduce our budget, we identify, positions, and we go through the process on HR for seniority purposes, as well as we'll capture any kind of retirements or resignations. So again, I couldn't tell you if there were actual people saying we were eliminating positions, but typically we have tried to capture where it was most beneficial for our infrastructure and least impactful to the system and employee overall.
One last follow-up. And I just want to make sure I break this out here. I'm looking at the color codes. The orange and the yellow are more likely to be in each of the 100 buildings or so that the school district maintains. And the central support services are most likely to be in the headquarters building.
Right, it's what people would view as central office and beyond. I mean, some of those positions are not located in the central office, but they're what we would.
They're not in a direct plant of school or
Right.
education facility.
That's correct.
But the orange and the yellow would be?
The orange would be, and in some cases, the yellow would be with regard to the custodians. But the maintenance department would not be. Safety and security staff could be in the schools, or would most likely be in the schools, as well as the dean supervisors.
Ms. Johnson, then the mayor.
Sorry to double dip here. One, as far as particularly your teachers, but for all of these cuts, are you taking into consideration the cost of new employee versus the cost of retiring employees?
In terms of how we project our needs for our budget, or I'm not
How you
understanding
project your
your-
needs for your budget, the cost of providing services, and the number of FTEs?
Absolutely, that's how we develop our budget, based on what we
So
think
it's all,
that-
I mean, we have had issues all around in the past where the baby boomers are retiring, they do cost a lot more than the new, so that was an issue before, so this is all in account, right? You take account
I'm
for-
sorry, I'm not following
Well,
your question.
We had a little problem, I think it was a year ago, where there were some savings because more people retired than you expected. And I just want to make sure you've taken into account this year.
Yes, we've looked at our attrition and our expectation of employees' movement on the salary benefit.
And then I'm not quite sure what this department's called, but it's basically an enterprise department, the one that does your construction, my brother used to be in it. And I know that is supposed to be budgeted as funds are available. Are they included in these costs, in these cuts?
What you have are general funds here, so
Okay,
if they
so-
are
so
through
they're outside of
projects
that.
and grants, then they would not be part of this.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, sir?
Well, I'm just struck, and it makes me wonder whether the legislature has cut its own staffing levels a commensurate amount. It'd be an interesting exercise to probe that question.
Mr. Mayor, I can't speak to what the legislature has done. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the Department of Education and reducing that staff, which supports many districts across the state.
I would always hope that those who call for cuts would lead by example, but I'm frequently disappointed in that expectation.
Anything else from the mayor? No. So we understand the base student allocation was supposed to go up by $50, it's not. Is that true?
Mr. Cheney, what we have done.
Don't worry, I haven't accused.
district will be about $5 million.
Another 5.
5 million in addition to the 11 million that we have here. And I think statewide it's roughly a $15 million impact.
Other questions from people here? Superintendent? I just want to remind the body that we're going into budget hearings on the school district budget on Tuesday, but it's only the total dollar amount. We can't adjust a program. We get calls from people, we'll drop this program or add money for this program. All we can affect is the total dollar amount. We're not a super school district, that's the responsibility of the elected people in the school board. Just want to remind the body, because we go through this discussion every now and then. Mr. Holman.
So, and I guess this is, and again, not having the numbers of the budget, full budget in front of me, we'll get our books in a moment, I'll be able to look through it a little better. This would be, I think, extremely helpful to be able to answer the public and their decisions. So I'm just doing a quick math, and I'm following the graph down below, no pun intended, following the little bars down below and the color coding. And as I'm just roughly looking at it, it appears that the ratio between, not including central support services, which of course is important, but in the buildings themselves, if I look at 100 facilities, I know not all of those are necessarily educational facilities, but I'm just assuming they are. It looks like that for instructional staff, it's 24 per building, and support all other, instructional support, ancillary, building leadership, administration, is about 26.5, so there's a ratio of about 1 to 1, roughly. And I'm wondering, is there a key or is there a standard that has been reviewed by the Great American Schools, or is there anything that the board has studied to see so that we can see what is the best performing schools, what is that ratio, what it would look like? And like, so much of the conversation is known about the enrollment, which is the second part of my question is, what's the current enrollment at Anchorage School District?
Currently, it's right around 47,000, I believe.
A little over 48.
A little over 48.
For enrollment, yeah.
For enrollment purposes, a little over 48.
Okay. So to me, I mean, I want success at our schools, period. And I personally think the investment is valid, particularly if you look at it from, if we fail, what downstream costs do we have as a community that we bear out in other areas in our community and to the direct cost of our taxpayers. So it would be very helpful to be able to explain the talking points if we could look at, hey, we're under. I can only use kind of my forte, which is I know what a good valid number is per ratio for a population for community policing versus responsive policing, reactive versus proactive. So if we're looking at schools that might be perhaps a higher level of standard testings or whatever you want to look at it, what are their ratios? And so if we have that, that would be very good talking points for us to be able to. Thanks.
Any other comments from people? Mr. Evans?
Just briefly, you were mentioning the enrollment. Can you tell us what that's been over the last 5 years, what the trend has been? We're at 48,000 now.
Sure, I'm going to ask our OMB director, Andy Ratliff, to speak to the exact numbers. I know we're up over what we had projected last year, and we're up over what we had last year. But I'll ask him to see if he can give us the...
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's hovered around 48,000, up or down, up 100 or 200 a year. So it's really maintained that same pretty flat level of around 48,000.
During the Harold Cuomo years, it was what, 54,000?
It got up to just over 50,000 in the high year. I believe it was around 2005 or 2006.
Eric?
Yeah, on those 2 points, Assembly Member Horniman, we do compare ourselves to staffing averages that are produced by Council of Great City Schools and others. It's one of the reasons that led to these reductions. 4, 5, 6 years ago, those ratios were higher in support staff than is optimal, than was considered the target, and that's what led to a lot of these decreases. And so we do monitor that each year. We're now much closer on those appropriate targets, and that's what led to a lot of those decreases. And that's focusing the decreases in the support and ancillary and central support instead of direct classroom instruction. And on your point, Assemblymember Evans, yeah, we're flat to declining is the summary. Not dramatic declines, but a slight tilt now. And that has led to us, we have throughout our entire history, really with the exception of the 80s, been built on a growth model. We were assuming we were growing, and we were building schools for that growth. And so our plan really always contemplated that you would replace a school. If you're growing, you're always going to replace a school, and every once in a while you're going to add a new one somewhere else. We've been forced over the last couple of years with flat to declining enrollment, with the lack of bond debt reimbursement from the state, and the resulting, from the first, the result being we have some extra capacity primarily in our high schools. Our elementary schools are in the 94% range filled, and that's about where you want to be. We could tinker with it, but it's mid-80s for our high school and middle school, and that has led us to the very difficult discussion of doing boundary changes or even school closure. You're going to see us over this year tackling that very tough issue. Nothing gets parents, teachers, everybody upset more than that discussion, but it's a big money item, and we're going to be addressing it. Not targeting any particular school, but looking at the entire capacity issue and whether we need to make adjustments to closure. And the savings there are in not having to rebuild a school that you don't need. The costs are in the fact that the state pays us less per student in a big school, so they discourage consolidation through that mechanism. So there's some operational losses we have there, and there's also just the disruption to people who love their neighborhood school and don't want to be moved. So short answer is flat to declining, and we're taking the difficult but fiscally responsible steps to look at what that means in terms of our capacity.
Ms. Johnson, and then the mayor, and then the superintendent.
I just want to mention that the two items that I've added to the agenda are budget related. I'm not sure if you want to change the order today or we'll just continue when we get
This
those.
is continuing. Mr. Mayor?
Two questions, Eric. One has to do with the potential closures, what the basis of those decisions would be. And second has to do with the foundation formula and whether the legislature would be well served if it was seeking to find efficiencies to change the formula.
May I, Mr. Chairman? Yeah, and so I met with a number of the affected PTAs, some of the ones that are up next on the bond, and so we're very upset about discussions about school closures at a time when they're next in line. Those were difficult discussions. They were very polite, but they were upset, and we've been in those type of meetings. Usually in Anchorage, we can go from upset to a merits-based discussion, and these all did. They were difficult but productive discussion. What those schools have said was, they don't want it to be about closing their school so much as the entire capacity. They don't object to a discussion district-wide of where we are and what we do. They don't want to be singled out. And so we passed a resolution, an addition on to the capital improvement plan that says we are telling you, we the board are telling you, the district, to look at this district-wide, not targeting any particular school. So and we have done that, and we have specifically said, let me just read from it, because you asked, we said the district shall conduct an open and transparent study of school capacity and usage in order to make recommendations to the board. These recommendations may include program changes, boundary changes, school consolidation and or closure, as well as any other change deemed necessary and appropriate based on the results of the study. The district may involve the CIAC or CIAC, which is our committee, a citizen committee on capital. The scope of the study is the entire district and is not directed at any particular school or community. The district shall give all affected school communities advance notice and an opportunity to comment. Any recommendation to reflect not only the capital cost savings of the school replacement, but also the potential impact on educational outcomes, the closure costs, the effect on operating costs, the impact on the students and the community, the fact that the foundation formula pays less per student in larger schools, and any other relevant factors. So that was another thing that came clear to me from this meeting. They really wanted us to make sure we looked at all mixed up in line, it poses unique factual risks to you. So I neither want them lulled into a false sense of security of what the risks are, but the study itself will not be targeted at them just because they're up next. And that we have done. On what the legislature does, that will be really interesting. You know, they've been trying to address these very small rural school issues, and there's a lot of history and fairness issues to that. What happens to a village when you close their school? Similarly, going down to Juneau and saying, if you would fix the formula, I could close your local school, is not a winning message sometimes. That is, they might tend to do the opposite thing of, no way I'm going to fix it, even if it will result in efficiencies, if it affects my local school. So I worry we run into some NIMBY there.
Just to follow up, so what you're saying is that the failure to correct the formula is creating inefficiencies?
It really yes, Mr. Mayor, it takes away the efficiencies. That is, when we consolidate two schools, we can save on staff. You know, we only have one principal instead of two, and one assistant principal instead of two, and one janitor instead of two. All those operational savings, in effect, get taken away by the state. So, and sometimes a little more so. So, what we save in operational efficiencies, they take and we're not allowed to realize. And sometimes it's even a net loss for us, and that discourages us from doing efficiencies at the local level.
So in other words, Juneau is inhibiting local control, which is driving up local cost.
In this situation, I think we are.
Okay. Superintendent?
I just wanted to make sure there were no more questions about the budget. I heard Mr. Honeman ask about the benchmarks and the percent ratio, and certainly we have been reviewing that. In fact, one of the things that we did is we looked at the classroom support versus the instructional support outside of the classroom, and rather than going to the classroom support and adjusting that ratio, we adjusted the outside support. Again, trying to stay away from the classroom as much as possible, but we do have work with the Council of Great City Schools around key performance indicators, and it's difficult to find a true comparison because we have some of our unique complexities up here in Alaska, but those are measures that we evaluate routinely and have done so for the last several years with our budget process.
Thank you. Mr. Honeman?
Well, to that, and I would like to encourage, if it's possible, and I know it seems simple enough of a request, but if it's possible that we could get a breakdown, perhaps much like you did with the building capital, done a fabulous job. So first, I want to commend the school board for taking on the heavy lift, if you will, the burden of shifting our paradigm or mindset of growing community to now stable community, to perhaps if it diminishes or declines, and all of the variables. These are not easy conversations to have, but they're realistic, and we have to approach them. So appreciate that, particularly with given all the technology and such. But so I'm just looking at the elementary school behind my house, Scenic Park Elementary. To the best of my knowledge, does not have an assistant principal, but does have a principal. So there's one, and I'm talking building leadership and management. I know they have 2, sometimes 3 office staff, and I know they have a custodian, and they have some new duties, but I don't think they have counselors. I think they have a nurse, but I don't believe they have much of it. I know that I believe they're an immersion school now. They have different gifted teachers or support teachers for that. But I know that an elementary school might have a half a dozen, but a high school might have 30. So using the ratio would be probably a blanket statement that I just gave of 100 buildings, all of them a school, the numbers that you have, making some simplistic formula isn't going to work. It's not one size. I get that. So it'd be very helpful to have. And then again, thank you very much for putting in all the effort of trying to dial in. I just think that using, again, the calculations in the old days, and I think it's changed through some efficiencies and logistics. It used to be for every infantry soldier on the ground in battle, there's 6 or 7 logistics support persons behind us. So the ratio is hugely skewed because you've got to ship bullets and needle items and equipment and your gas, and so all the clothing. And so it's not just the guy on the battlefield engaging in combat. So this is the same analogy. It's not just the classroom teachers, but how much support staff do they have in order to have success for our students. It seems to me that if we limit and reduce support, then the teacher has to carry on more of a burden. And I can just imagine there's one family, I can't remember the name of it, but I think they got like 22 kids or something like that. And if they homeschool them, then they've got the ratio of, of 1 to 20 that you have in a classroom, or 1 to 24. That's not realistic. So you get all these variables. It's a complex thing. So thank you for taking on the heavy lift. It really helps us in the decision making. As much information as we can express to the community is helpful.
President?
I'll hold my comments to the next item. I think we'll be more relevant there.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Honeman. I wanted to address Mr. Honeman's concerns about, do we look at national research that talks about what is the best allocation of staff? And in fact, in the past year, we hired Larry Pikus of a national organization called Pikus Odin to look at what are best practices and what are adequacy studies. And I hate to use the word adequacy because there are so many different interpretations of that, but in the sense of what gives the best results in academic outcomes. And we're waiting, the administration is still looking at that study, and we're waiting for the final report to give us some guidelines. We've had some preliminary results. He did come up around November and talk with us. And there are some obvious fixes to some of the situations, but that requires additional financing because it is, quite frankly, lower class size. And in other states where they have used similar studies by the same organization, they are starting to see some of the results of that. But in these fiscal times, it's very difficult to even begin to have that discussion, even when you know what best practices are on where you go. But those are taken into consideration in addition to the Council of Great City Schools recommendations when we look at these staffing challenges.
Any comments on this item? Okay, we'll move on the agenda. Now we're down to item 6C, School District 6-Year Capital Improvement Plan.
Thank you, Chair Training. At this time, I'd like to ask Tom Roth, our Chief Operating Officer, to come forward and just kind of give an overview of the capital improvement plan. Chris Emmerich.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to spend a couple minutes with you this morning to talk about the District's 6-year capital improvement plan, encompassing years 2016 through 2022. By way of introduction, you each should have two products from the capital planning construction teams. The first is the Table 1 that depicts the 6-year capital plan, and I'll come to that momentarily. And then the other product is a current status dated 7 March of ongoing projects of bond years past. So my intent, my agenda up front is to provide you a very quick wave top update on some of the major projects that are ongoing in the school district. I've got representation here from capital planning and construction. If you have any more detailed or specific questions to ask, we're prepared to answer those. And then I'll transition into the 6-year CIP. Of course, during the process, if there are any questions, I'll pause from time to time to answer questions that you may have. So first, by way of the CIP, we introduced this product to the municipality on the 10th of March. It will go in front of the assembly on the 22nd. In terms of a quick project update, again, the update you have is dated on 7 March. It is available on the Capital Planning and Construction webpage, on the ASD webpage. If you ever have any questions at any time about projects that are ongoing in the district, it's a great place to go to get an update. In short, the projects that are ongoing in the district, they are on time and within budget. Just to highlight a couple of our major projects that are ongoing. Airport Heights Elementary School, that's a 2014 bond project. This is a building, school renewal, expected to be complete August 2016. That project is moving forward great. Concurrently, Rabbit Creek Elementary School. This is a 2015 project. Again, they're about halfway through that. We anticipate completion by August of this year. And then the other major school extension project we have going on is Muldoon Elementary. Again, on time, on budget. Expect the completion of that elementary school by December of this year. And then the other 2015 school renewal projects, Gladys Wood and Turnigan, we're well into the design phase of those, and we anticipate moving forward on those projects by this year as well. So overall, the construction effort within the district is going great. I'll pause at this time if there are any questions that anybody might have on current projects.
Any questions? Mr. Holman?
Yes, sir. I'm looking at some of the project names, like Mountain View ESBLE. Is that basic life?
Elementary school building life extension is what it's acronym.
So you're not tearing it down, because I see demolition and all that kind of stuff. You're gutting it.
Right. In many of the renewal projects, building life extensions, there are requirements to remediate asbestos and other issues. So they'll basically gut the inside of a building before going about the upgrades and improvements.
Questions from members? Please continue, sir.
Great. What I'd like to do now is to briefly transition over to the 6-year capital improvement recommendation for 2016 to 2022. And just by way of orientation, if you look at this chart, it will list the projects by school, broken down by category: elementary, middle, high schools, and then alternative schools. And then years 1 through 6. Year 1 represents the district's proposal that was put in front of the assembly earlier this year for this capital improvement bond that will be on the ballot on the 5th of April, which the assembly very enthusiastically supported and pushed forward. Thank you for that support. That amount is 41.255 million for this year. What is unique about the CIP this year from years past is we are also including as a part of our capital upgrades our 15-year cyclic bus replacement plan. So this first installment on that 15-year plan is a 3.5 million allocation that would purchase 27 buses over a 2-year period, and then every other year you will see an allocation for a lesser number of buses to replace our bus fleet. So just by way of background for the planning for the CIP, the planning began in earnest frankly in September of this year, involving the capital planning and construction team, the administration staff, and also the capital improvement advisory committee, as board member Croft indicated, is our public representation to the process of defining capital improvements. The strategy in general has changed for our capital improvement plan due to fiscal considerations, the loss of state payment towards the debt or contributions, and our large number of deferred maintenance. The focus or the strategy is really focused on getting after deferred maintenance as a priority, and then in the context of the fiscal considerations, instead of going towards full-scale renewal of schools, which are more expensive, the district is focusing primarily in those schools that we do go into for a more holistic fix. We're trying to get after just those components, those critical components that those schools need to be safe, functional for our students and teachers. So that is our focus for this. And just to highlight a couple of things, and it's not my intent to go through each one of these years, but to give you some context for the 6-year plan, some things that are different from the previous year's submission. Based on recommendations from the administration and the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, the district is accelerating the renovations for Whaley and the movement of Mount Iliamna from what is currently a facility on J-Bear to an elementary school. Currently, it's Lake Otis Elementary School, an expansion, if you will, for those programs, and that was based on the informed assessment that those current facilities are not up to standard for those student populations. So we have moved those forward in the design and the execution. We've added Avenue Elementary School, which is a school that did require, over time, wholesale renovation. But due to a determination by the fire marshal that that school requires an internal or integrated sprinkler system, we've added that school to the 6-year plan. Most of the schools were what we call emergent component renovation, or have been added as emergent component renovation, which is, again, as I explained, a more focused effort to repair those things if we need to. Several of those schools were renewals on previous submissions, so we have lowered the scope again to maintain costs. And then, as I mentioned, we've added buses. We targeted as best we could to stay within the debt retirement for each of the 6 years. We do recognize in 2022, as things stand, the state moratorium on debt reimbursement will likely be lifted through as we know it now. So I'll pause at this time if there are any questions on the CIP.
Mr. Mayor, first.
A quick question. If we don't take care of the short-term maintenance costs now, what are the long-term costs?
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that question. And I think as we all realize, these problems that we have in buildings, they are not self-correcting. You have to address them. And typically, if you don't address them in a timely manner, in terms of preventive maintenance, when systems actually fail, it's a bit more problematic and timely. Just to give you an example. Earlier in the academic year, we had a boiler system that failed at Ravenwood Elementary School. We knew this boiler was on life support, and we probably could have gone in earlier to replace key components of it. But when it failed, it was a complete failure, so we had to replace the entire boiler. So that's kind of an example of, if you don't do it when you know you need to do it, when you have to actually go in and repair something, the costs are more expensive.
So with that boiler, how much was the new boiler as opposed to?
I believe we paid somewhere in the neighborhood of about $45,000 to replace that boiler. Components of that probably would have been in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, just a guesstimate of that cost.
Mr. Holman?
And the only question, I guess, and I realize there's discussion and talk about the military and perhaps some reductions. Isn't Iliamna, is that the Elmendorf side, isn't it?
Yes, it's on the Elmendorf side,
Have
right
they-
adjacent to Orion Elementary.
Have they expressed any concerns about having to apparently bus their kids to Lake Otis, as opposed to having,
We actually bus the majority of that student population onto J-Bear for those students to attend Mount Iliamna. So instead of, and that presents its own challenges for a number of reasons. The location on J-Bear, parents, as an example, are not readily allowed access on the base. So I think Lake Otis, as opposed to the current facility on the base, in terms of total distance, probably is a wash. But I think in terms of the lack of challenge to get onto the base, going off base is a better solution.
Before 9/11, all the procedures were put together on base. After 9/11, the whole dynamics even of the Elmendorf J-Bear has changed. So it's harder for parents, in some cases, to get on base, to see their kids over the It just doesn't work. So that's the reason they want to move it.
Some parents
So,
can't even get access.
What?
Some parents can't even get access.
Can't even get access. And that's in comparison to what people have in town.
if you don't mind, what's the ratio of on-base students versus off-base students in Iliamna?
I don't.
Just curious if the base is actually concerned about losing a school.
I can speculate, again, this program that's being offered at Mount Vernon is district-wide, so students who receive those services come from all over, and I would say it's easily 85, 90%, maybe even higher, because, you know, the population of J-Bear is much smaller percentage-wise, so we've got 100, under 100 kids who are in this program. The chances of 10% coming from J-Bear are pretty slim.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Mr. Steele, sir.
Similar items, certainly, in terms of, there have been some policy changes and recommendations in terms of, like access to the schools, where the public gets access to the school, and is it a controlled access or is it not? And there are some schools that require a major remodel, or bit of a remodel of some sort in order to move those access points to gain eyes on people coming and going. Where do we stand with those schools that need that kind of adaptation, if you will, or changes?
And just to recap what I think I understand your question or observation to be, ideally for any school, the optimum situation is when somebody comes in to enter the school, that the administration has an office that is in immediate proximity to the door, that they can see people coming in. And because many of the schools in the district were built way before this is even a consideration, we have a number of schools where the offices are remote from those schools. So to answer your question in a somewhat general way, we don't have a system in place to just move offices forward in a school building to address this consideration. However, when we do design for renewals or building life extension, I'll use Anchorage as an example, we do plan to, as a part of the project, to remote the office to the front of the building so they have that immediate view access of people coming in, but it's programmatic to renewals of schools.
I think it's specifically at Tourniquet Elementary. I know that there's, as a part of their upgrades that they've been doing,
Yes.
There was the plan to move the access over there.
Ms. Carey,
But I don't know
Ms.
how many.
Napier, they're intimately involved in those designs.
I don't know how many
and that's-
schools we have that we still need to do that type of.
Can you address that, Mary? The question is, how many elementary schools do we still have that have offices that are not in near proximity to the front doors?
If you could give us some time, we may have that in our information. We have a database with it that we've been tracking.
On this item, sir?
Yeah, I just didn't know how big a problem it was and how what kind of progress we were making in terms of that. And or how our lack of funding is changing for impact.
And we got some other assembly comments. I would tell you that Ileana used to be a DOD school. We picked it up when we unified. Picked up the DOD school, so we didn't build that school originally. That was an old DOD school. Ms. Johnston?
Actually, I'm just saying my next item on the agenda plays into this, so save me.
Mr. Evans?
Sure, just kind of bootstrapping on the mayor's comments from before about, the long-term costs of not maintaining things. Given the fact that we've kind of reached this sort of fiscal cliff in our state that we all realize, but in previous years, up until this point, and not that long ago, the state was fairly flush with money and spending it somewhat like it was water. Why is it that we have so many items that you refer to as deferred maintenance now? Why weren't these taken care of with the thought that maintaining these things does save money in the long run? You could comment on that.
Sure, I will start.
Superintendent President?
Since Tom wasn't.
I want to be in the queue.
You're in the queue, sir.
All right, thanks.
Superintendent?
Yeah, the model that we've gone to, or we went to 6 years ago, was looking at a metric or a measurement to determine what should be brought forward through the bonds, in part because there were some individuals who believed that it was, whoever came to the board meeting and complained allowed us, got their project pushed forward. So we wanted the board to request to specifically look at a measurement, a tool to determine the needs. And so we went through the education adequacy and the facilities condition index. So when we went to that, it balanced out deferred maintenance with educational needs, and the approach to addressing those was more of a building life extension or a renovation remodel. And those are much more costly measures when you're looking at addressing a full-scale school remodel or renovation. And so in that, I think you captured some of those maintenance needs that needed to be addressed, but you also limited the number of projects you could do, because the scope and the cost associated with that model. So since then, we've come back and revisited, and that's what Mr. Roth was saying, how we went to more of a deferred maintenance model, still using some measurement tool to determine the needs, but focusing more on life safety and immediate maintenance kind of approaches to things.
And if I can add just a more, I guess, from a recent context. It's my observation that the capital planning construction team with the maintenance team have taken a much more deliberate and comprehensive look at all of our facilities, and because of that more comprehensive look and that cooperation between the two. So if I'm a facilities planner, I kind of understand the maintenance demand history more on things like roofs and boilers, how many trips are our mechanics taking to go out to repair things. That's informing a lot more on the side of understanding what we need to, in an anticipatory way, replace as a matter of preventive maintenance. So I think we have a more comprehensive look now than perhaps in the last few years.
President?
Yeah, I wanted to just take a moment to go back to the beginning of this conversation and connect it to what Mr. Croft was saying earlier, in that this is a real transition year for us. We've made some real changes as it relates to our capital planning, and as was discussed earlier, we had a process of looking at educational adequacy and facility condition as a way of really determining what our highest priority capital projects were. And because of the change in our fiscal environment, because of the changes in the state's reimbursement, because of some of the information that we were learning about deferred maintenance, we really, as a board, shifted our approach, and that was reflected in our bond package this year, and is also reflected in our 6-year CIP. But what we've also done is we've as a board, given guidance to do the administration, which is added to this package. And in addition to that, we plan on doing what was discussed earlier, which is a study to look at the utilization of our schools and facilities, and to have the administration come back and give us some good information about not only why are some of our facilities underutilized, but what are some of the options that we have as a board to address that. And I think that study and this conversation about a new environment is going to really influence our capital planning moving forward. So I would characterize this year as a transition year for us, and that we are really adjusting to this new environment and trying to make some really well thought out decisions. So we're in the process of, as I said, gathering more and more information. But the last thing I guess I would add is that I wanted to mention earlier about this study that we're doing, and that it really is a study to look at why we're not utilizing all of our facilities and what options are there. And we're not presupposing what those options are. We want to hear from the administration whether we can shift programming, whether we can utilize our facilities in different ways. And sure, we want to make sure that it's on the table, that if boundary changes are necessary, or if consolidation of schools are necessary, we want to consider those. But we want to first have the information in front of us first. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
I was just wondering, when you were looking at this process for your CIP, I know this year you kept in mind the anticipated death retirement and being below that. And when you came before the assembly, I asked, did you look at the annual cost without the reimbursement from the state? And I just wondered, when you were discussing your options, did you look at just looking at the annual cost of your bonding and putting a percent, CIP increase to it as a base amount to look at to begin with? And then my second question, I noticed in 2 years out of these 5 years, 6 years, you have suggested bonding above what you're retiring. So I'm seeing some trends here. Not only are the impact on the taxpayers going to be increasing due to lack of state reimbursement, but also to your bonding package. But you're also you're not following sort of what was established, I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago, only issuing debt, amount of debt that you've already retired. So how did you get to that point, and why did you get to that point? And I realize this is 6 years kind of going out, but I have concerns, mainly large concerns. What will the public do?
I'll address it to begin, and I'll let other board members speak to it. The original guidance to the administration was to develop a 6-year capital plan that reflected focusing on our most vital large maintenance needs, things that were life safety, the projects that really kept our buildings functioning effectively, and moving away from full school renewals. And so the administration prioritized those projects and brought forward the most urgent and necessary projects, and that's what dominates this plan. Following that, there was some discussion about, for instance, in the 2 cases you're mentioning, a previous investment, a significant investment in planning dollars that had already been invested into a few projects that if we waited too long could potentially be lost. So that there was an addition to the administration's recommendation based on that, based on the previous investment of planning dollars and making sure that we were capitalizing on those. So that's a result that you have in front of you, and I wanted to sort of lay that out, and then I think Mr. Croft and Ms. Augustes will want to add to that.
Mr. Croft, you want to make all this?
Yeah, thank you to that issue. A couple of points about this CIP and the current bond we have before us. This is the first bond that doesn't have a major school reconstruction in a significant amount of time. It's what Alaskan families would do in a fiscal situation, difficult fiscal situation. Instead of remodeling the house or buying a new one, we're fixing our roofs and we're fixing what we got rather than rebuilding new stuff. And that's a significant change as has been talked about earlier. We took the bond, the original proposal, down a fair amount to get it under 50 million. It was in the mid 55. So we reduced it significantly. We are, in terms of bonded indebtedness, at the lowest amount the school district is. It's been in 12 years. We're just at 600 million. It's been as high as 800 million over that period of time. And in terms of a percentage of the Anchorage housing and business valuation, the total valuation of Anchorage, it's the lowest it's been since the end of the crash in '88. That is, we're at about 1.7% of the Anchorage valuation, and it's been as high as 4%. And so we are, by any measure, significantly down in terms of the total bonded debt. You asked about this sort of. It was never a policy anymore, but that we try and put bonds that only impose what we've already retired. And that was, I think, a good selling point to some bonds, an appropriate sort of measure. But it's not sustainable in the long run, any more than trying to pay rent at 20 years ago rates is going to get you the same kind of housing anymore. You simply cannot live forever in 20 years ago numbers. And so we knew that retire what we impose in years, while it can be a good political selling point, was not a long-term bar. Your tax cap does not rely on such a immovable number. It fluctuates with the valuation and other issues, and it should, so that you can grow a city with the city's growth. You can grow a city's infrastructure with its growth. So we've been searching, and we have before the board a measure that says we want to be no more than X percentage of total valuation in the city, a number that will grow like your tax cap, but puts a constraint on us and replaces numbers that just weren't sustainable. So yes, some of these numbers fall within that old idea of what we retire. Some don't, and the years that don't were years, as Mr. Perez-Padilla says, where, I mean, Romic just closed down its gym, and because of damage. And if we didn't do some of the Romic West, we would lose significant amounts that we've already spent on planning. There are needs that have to be accommodated that it simply couldn't be under that. So we have lowered the amount. We have the lowest amount through any number of measures that we've had in a long, long time. We're looking at the very difficult issues of capacity and closures. And all those are leading us to a sustainable, long-term, but limited fiscal plan. But there were just needs coming out in the future that could not be accommodated in that kind of thing.
Mr. Mayor, then Mr. Evans.
The city wants the Great Lakes to get a good bond rating. It doesn't do us a lick of good if we just leave it on the shelf. And we need to recognize that the state has almost no capital budget kicking around right now. We have historically low interest rates. You've got contractors who are hungry, so the dollars that we spend on any of these projects go a lot farther than they have in the past. We also need to recognize that even though there's issues with the state's fiscal situation today, and emphasize the state, not the municipalities, because we're in a very strong position, what we have to be ready for tomorrow. That the sole focus on today's problems at the expense of tomorrow's responsibilities and tomorrow's opportunities is hugely problematic. And one of the responsibilities we have around this table is to broaden that conversation and remind the folks in Juneau that their problems don't limit our options.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Evans, sir?
Just following up on Mr. Croft, it sounds like you indicated there is a number of the total valuation that you kind of set as a target. What is that number that you set upon?
So I sent everybody, I just sent the clerk and all the assembly members, if I did it right, but anyway, a spreadsheet showing those numbers, the total bonded indebtedness, both in an absolute number and as a percentage of the Anchorage valuation. It also has enrollment, so you can compare all those things. The average over about the last 20 years had been at 2.7. We wanted to constrain ourselves. We're looking at a number that's about 2.5 as a limit, if you will, a bonded debt cap. We're at about 1.7 now. I think anywhere in those mid to low twos would be, you don't want to draw it so tight that you severely restrict, but you want it to be a real limit that imposes some discipline. So we're looking at 2.5 now. As I said, it's been as high as 4. We're at 1.7 now, and as an average, it's about 2.7 over the last 15 or 20 years.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead, sir.
And if you know off the top of your head, Eric, what would be the total debt amount at 2.7 with today's valuation? Do you know what that number would be?
You and I can calculate it from this. The assessed valuation now in Anchorage is about 36 billion. And we're sitting at 1.7. I don't know, but I can get that from either one of us from the spreadsheet or maybe with a little more time. The reason it's been going down so dramatically if we were retiring fully, or imposing what we retired, as Assemblyperson Johnson and I were talking about, then you'd expect it to be flat. But the difficulty is you never quite hit that mark, and then every third or fourth or fifth years, we've had good success with our school bond, but our bond will fail, and we never make up that territory. We never say, oh, this 50 million failed, and now this year it is that plus what we're retiring. So that's why we're in this sort of death spiral of declining capital, because if you only do what you retire, and then every 4 or 5 or 6 years one fails, you're just going down into an unsustainable place. So we wanted to pick a target that would both grow the city and that was stable in that.
Pam?
Yeah, Mr. Croft pointed out most of the things I wanted to say, but I did want to point out in the year 6, that's based on the assumption that the debt reimbursement program will be reinstated. If we hear that that's not going to be reinstated, then we will probably need to look at those numbers and readjust.
Mr. Holman. Well, I'm glad to hear Ms. Yusuf say that, because although I agree pretty much with everybody's conversation on this particular matter of capital improvement and bonding. At the bottom line, at the end of the day, all we can do is present the best case, pitch the program, and the voters will speak. And so being responsible elected officials and being able to have a conversation about this would also lend better credibility to our constituents and the voter public if we remain flexible. So for year 2, going 24 million over what's being paid off, perhaps in year 2 we may have a different fiscal climate both at the city and the state level. So I think we need to be open to the fact that we have to be somewhat flexible and look at some of these projects, and I hate to say it because I absolutely loathe kicking the can down the road, deferred maintenance. But sometimes it's just not practical to push on full steam ahead. I agree with what the mayor's, and I actually more support the mayor's fundamental philosophical belief is in this administration versus in the past, where we were simply trying to figure out what we're not going to do. What I think we should be looking at is, as things have shifted, let's look at how can we responsibly accomplish things and what we can do. And so I think that's the balance of the conversation. We need to make sure that we're getting it right, that we're listening, because Ms. Johnson is correct. We've kind of let this, it's kind of like calling 911. We've educated people all along now that if you have a problem, call 911. So you get taxi calls from drunks at a payphone saying, hey, can you come pick me up? This is the number, 911. We've inundated the 911 system so the true emergencies get shipped and shuttled. So we've led the public to believe that we're going to be not bonding indebtedness higher than what we're paying off. And so we need to make sure we're having a serious conversation as to why, and is it in reflecting what's currently the fiscal climate in year 2017-18. And right now, my crystal ball isn't that clear, so I can't imagine anybody else's being. And if it is, I'd love to look at yours. Mr. Hall.
Yeah, I get a crystal ball. Well, I love sitting and listening to these conversations because deferred maintenance has been an issue since we were in the state, so this isn't new. And a lot of people have come and gone through these offices over a number of years, and there's been a lot of them with regular intentions to pick up on all the deferred maintenance, but quite honestly, the number is so large that it's really beyond our minds to grasp when we get to the end of the day. We've actually seen instances occur in Fairbanks where they've torn down buildings and built new ones because they let the deferred maintenance go so long that they couldn't save the buildings. But the one topic that I wanted to broach this morning that we addressed at A&L this year is the, I guess what I call the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room with us, and that is our bond rating. As you all know, we have a huge PERS and CHERS liability that's laying out there. And currently, it's really not on anybody's ledger. There was a discussion about it this year. The state tried to move it to municipal,
And AML stood up, made a big enough pitch about it that they actually retained it, showing it on their ledger, but put an asterisk by it and a note at the bottom that these are responsibilities that really belong to municipalities. So we're sitting there with a very real possibility that the state could say, here, you've got to reflect this, and it's, I don't remember, what's the range? $600 million? It's huge. That could suddenly be on our, yeah, it's interesting because there was a very long article in the paper this morning about all of a sudden lending institutions are waking up and realizing that we're all sitting out here not reflecting that liability, and they're selling bonds, their assets aren't there to back them up. So, you know, the bond rating that we are enjoying today, we could lose in a heartbeat with just that one adjustment being made at the state level in regards to liability, responsibility for the PERS and TERS, which is about $9 billion statewide.
We haven't seen the latest. It could be back up to 11 again. It could be up on
So, you know, so that's probably the reason that honestly we're going to look at doing some bonding for these, and I encourage it, is let's do it when we do have some good bond ratings, because we could lose those very rapidly.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? It's getting late, we need to move on to the next item.
Next item is
6D, ASD Building and Maintenance Lawn Reserves.
And it's just a quick
Ms.
question,
Johnson?
as you're moving forward with this. I had asked for, somebody asked, who asked, and I was thinking, well, of course you would do that. I always ask every year for this year fiscal plan. And I asked for it again this year, and I asked for it at flat funding, state flat funding, so it was at least giving you a baseline. One of my questions is, as I'm looking at this proposed CIP, in that 6-year fiscal plan, and even in this year's, I would hope, for sure in this year, have you maintained your reserves going forward? And when you did that 6-year fiscal plan, did you track this elevated bonding that you're looking at doing? Did you track the reserves in that? So it was reflected in the 6-year fiscal plan? Because it looked pretty flat to me and I wasn't sure.
Mr. Chairman, what you're referring to is the mutual agreement conversation we've had with the Assembly for many years on ensuring that we have a certain percentage in our fund balance.
Right, and it's for our bond rate.
Yes, so we have that identified, and we've looked at it as a percent rather than a number. So it's there, 10%.
And it was there in your figures as you went forward and projected.
We're very conscientious of that. We know that helps the municipal bond rating.
Well, it helps the school district, it helps, I mean, we're all in that one together.
Yep. Anything else, Matt?
No, that was my question.
Thank you. Mr. Holman?
Well, in that vein, and it might be just a little bit of a shift towards it, but I think, and I've said this since before in this body, and as a member of this community for 43 years, I implore the school district, school board, I absolutely believe that as we've changed our shift in our thinking on older buildings, not completely gutting and starting all over, raising and demolishing, if we're going to be serious about not deferring maintenance and not getting to the point where a boiler is failing and we got to worry about scrambling for $80,000 or $100,000, then is our ongoing maintenance plan and the monies that budgeted for that district-wide, is it enough? And I'm not really sure that it is. So if we have money left over at the end of the year and we've met that target 10%, can we not take a percentage of the fund balance and apply that towards towards that maintenance account, so that a plumber can go and fix the boiler with parts and pieces and know that there's money in the budget to do it, so that it doesn't get to that total catastrophic failure. And I think that, and I'm going to use an example. I remember going to bond over bleachers replacement in a high school gymnasium, and it was, I want to say, and I could be wrong, but the number was somewhere around $100,000. And I thought, well, if at a high school as old as West High, somewhere along the way, we should have been setting aside money, knowing that those parts and pieces are mechanical are gonna fail. Why do we wait till it gets to a point where we put it on a bond? So if we can have an adequate fund balance amount dedicated to the maintenance plan, that might save us from having to go to these bonded numbers that are gonna scare the public and perhaps they fail in the transmission process. So I think I'm just imploring everybody, as my comment on this, is to make sure that we're addressing this.
Superintendent?
Yeah, to your point, Mr. Holman, that is a recommendation that I think the administration is gonna come forward with, given the potential risk of bonds not passing, and looking at what the future holds, having an account set up for just that purpose, so that we can be proactive rather than reactionary in these situations.
Mr. Higgins.
Thank you. I just want to kind of put it in perspective a little bit, because we've been doing these bonds because the state's encouraged it by paying 60 to 70%, and we're being told you can put it all on the taxpayers, you can take it out of the classroom, you can do other things, but we want to bond these. They set it up that way that the building life extensions that have to be done, their state is not providing that to the operating funds, and they're giving us that in bonds by reimbursing it that way. If I'm a business, I'd be a stupid fool not to turn down 60 or 70% of it that way, and to take it out of the classroom during this period, the benefits that we would get out of it, it doesn't make sense. We go back to 8 years ago when I got on the board, we weren't limited to the 50 million. We were looking at doing service and a number of other things a lot higher. And then 5 years ago, we changed the way that we're doing the bonds, but we did it before giving the assembly notice saying, look, we're looking at changing the way we do bonds because we want to do career technology. We wanted to do educational enhancements in addition to just strictly the building maintenance and building renovations. I mean, I look back at it, I think it was, we were waiting for the school to need total remodel before we got in there and did the maintenance. That way we could change the educational delivery in that school as well. That was done well before me, and as far as the bonding issue, that goes back, way back. But when the state's paying 67%, they're encouraging that, and they're not giving the money in the budget for us to be able to do it. So I think we're shifting it in retrospect based upon how a business would do it, and I would say a business would have been doing this all along. When you get that much of a refund coming from the state, 60, 70%, we're being told this is how we want you to do it. I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways, and we're seeing now they're deferring costs for the future when we may not have the funds to pay for it. I mean, there's a way to pass it on to the next legislature, right? And not deal with the problem, kind of like where we're today. In some respects, without having a long-term fiscal plan, we'll wait for the future. Somebody else can deal with it. But I just want to kind of put that in perspective, that the state encouraged and supported and expected us to do it the way we did it, and taking it out of the educational dollar to us wouldn't have made sense then.
Mr. Holman? That's it. Any discussion? Mr. Steele?
Yeah. You're kind of right, Patrick, on that. That was a negotiated agreement, though, between urban and rural legislators to try and everybody to get a little fairness in terms of the cost of building schools. I still think that the state has some responsibility and should continue it, but we at the local level have a huge responsibility to keep our businesses working, to keep our people employed. Otherwise, we're going to have huge economic downturns in the municipality. And so I'm glad that we're able to continue to issue bonds and continue to encourage building and employment in our community. I think the mayor alluded to there's some issues coming up now with regards to the state budget and so on and so forth. But if we're not able to keep a healthy economy in the city, we're all hurt. And these little small budget sections, these budget issues become permanent.
That's all we've got, then we're gonna move on to the next item. I just want to say one last thing. Those who defer maintenance,
I've talked to the feds and learned from their experience. When you've had a major catastrophe, earthquake or fire or typhoon or something come through, the feds first look at your deferred maintenance. They wipe that off the board. The feds do not come in and help you with deferred maintenance. The argument is you should have taken care of it. So any deferred maintenance we have another earthquake here, the feds are not gonna come in and make this town whole. They're gonna start with the idea you should have taken care of it yourself and go from there. That always concerns me. Ms. Johnson, let's move to your item, which is PERS and TERS.
Right, and the reason I can't answer right now Mr. Hall's question as far as the overall unfunded liability of the pension funds is I know that there is a draft actuarial report out there. They did it for pension obligation bonds, and it's draft, and you can't seem to get your hands on it. So I can't tell you exactly how much that is. I can tell you I was down there last week working on the on behalf payment of, and it's my understanding, it was very clear last week when I was down there that there is going to be a bill that's going to be introduced, and once it is, it's going to be fast tracked on both either the House or the Senate. I've been surprised because I thought it was going to come out Friday, and it hasn't come out, and it's been a week. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be aware of it. There's a couple of things, and before I tend to get in the weeds with this, and folks start glazing over. But one of the, if they increase PERS or decrease PERS on behalf of payment by 1%, for the school district, that's $1 million. For the city, it's about $2 million. When we talk about liability going out, not even talking about what they're paying on behalf of, but currently how the liability of the unfunded liability is gone. And by the way, these on behalf payments are in statute, so they're gonna have to do it with a bill. They can't do it in the budget. Last couple of years ago, we worked hard to get them to pay down the unfunded liability. They did a $2 billion into the TERS and $1 billion into PERS, so it was really helpful for the state because they're paying more for TERS. When they did that, what they did is they extended the amortization period 9 years. So the municipality of Anchorage had an additional $250 million tacked onto our unfunded liability, if we don't even count the on behalf of. If they raise PERS by 1%, I figure that's about another $104, $105 million. So that's an additional $350 million that goes on our financial statements as liability. So that's pretty clean and clear, how we're currently treating it, for everybody's information. My understanding, what they're looking at TERS, because they do the reimbursement rate or on behalf payment of TERS far exceeds what it does with PERS, is they're looking at least a 5%. And it's my understanding for the school district, that's an additional $3.3 million. 13.3 million. And we do, I know we have first quarter budget revisions that I will not be voting on, I will not be part of. But I hope that you were at this point doing your number crunching, because that's easily is going to be $14.4 million additional funding that you're going to have to come up with. So I just want to wave that flag. I put a lot of time into it last week. I'm not sure if my work and others has made a difference. It's taken a week and they still haven't put the bills on the table, but I think you're going to see something. The interesting thing about PERS is the savings to the state is about $6 million for a 1% increase. Greater savings for the TERS. But anyways, I just wanted to put it out there. I want you to be aware of it. And
we take some questions, ma'am?
Yeah, I'll take questions. Or
Just got a comment from
comments, questions,
yes.
Superintendent?
Thank you. And so thank you for your work in trying to present the concerns associated with that potential bill. Comments not supporting it.
Yeah.
Obviously, what the impact will be is significant. I mean, you mentioned plan for essentially a $15 million reduction on top of the $11 million that we have, on top of the $2 million that we have in transportation, and plan that going forward.
And, you know, and reality is, you know, it could very easily happen, so I hope you are on top of it and you're looking into it and being prepared for it.
Yeah.
And again, for our, you know, as we look forward, also you look at our unfunded liability that we have to put on our financial statements. So this is all, you know, crap happens. And crap happens in this day and age. I didn't say it like I did with another level. And, you know, we can't put our heads in the sand and say that it doesn't happen. So I just hope, people are aware. And, you know, going down to June, I was asked yesterday by a reporter, you know, so do you think we should be, as a community, working in Juneau to get more funding? And I don't think that really is what we can do anymore. We have to work with Juneau to see how they can have a sustainable budget, we can have a sustainable budget, and we have to live with that. So, you know, even Mr. Hall did some great work with AML as far as taking a strong stance on pushing costs locally and pushing costs to taxpayers. And it's true, you know, they have, their tax base is really one industry. So this is gonna happen, and it is gonna be put through local tax base for a while until we can figure out how to develop a sustainable and more innovative and entrepreneurial type.
Questions, Mr.
They were talking at one point about a pension, a bond.
Pension obligation bond, and they tried, the Barker administration brought it out. It's already on the books. The state government can do this. One of the things that was very interesting on the pension obligation bond that was being pushed by the administration is it didn't include the rest of us employers, which is municipalities, universities. It was just took care of the state level. And that gets really messy because back in 2008, when they put everybody's together, no one, you can't really allocate it out. And how they allocated it out was by what your salary base was in 2008. So I think the administration might have realized that it was a little messy and probably wasn't I'd like to say not transparent. So anyways, they've gone back to the drawing board on how to do that. And the pension obligation bond could be a way of dealing it. I think you have to be concerned when you do a pension obligation bond. Sometimes you can make a spread between the bond and the market. And if that spread starts going for other than pension obligations, paying off the bond, and it goes for something else. So, I mean, that's where you're getting, it gets messy.
Other questions from Ms. Johnson? Not seeing any, then we're gonna move on. Thank you, Jennifer. The work's been really great down there. We appreciate you going down there. Mr. Honeman, you wanna talk about guns on
Yes,
campus?
I know this can be a controversial topic, so I just something to think about, and I'm not sure, I guess the question to the school district administration, I'm not sure if anybody has brought in, I know there's been some conversations. In essence, the Board of Regents of the University of Alaska, up until this recent legislation introduced by Senator Kelly out of Fairbanks, essentially the law authorized the Board of Regents to set policies about firearms on their campuses statewide. The regents do allow some exceptions with permission, but, and I'm thinking it's something similar to what the principals have at each of the schools under the school district policy about firearms on the school district campus. But generally speaking, they're not allowed. So because we had Windler Middle School, King Career Center, and Lake Otis Elementary right there at the main campus area, and because we have several school district programs with students as young as age 14 and 15 on the campus on a regular basis, the aviation logistics at Merrill location. I know that there's several students in the honors programs that are taking classes in Rasmussen Hall and all across our campuses, not to mention the many programs that are hosted there. So I don't know if the administration has taken a position, and I know it's a political football and nobody really likes to talk about it. Mr. Chair, I know that we both agree that firearms are a wonderful thing, but on the other hand,
State preemptive around this.
yeah, so the bottom line is that the issue now becomes one of, is this legislation something that we as a body should enter into, or as a school district should enter into, and our voice being heard and as a collective. And I'm not sure if your board has approached it as administration or and attempted to write something up, and we may discuss it coming in the future.
We've not
So,
approached it.
President, do you want to address this issue with the board?
I can just say that we have not addressed it at this point. Certainly, if you're inclined to develop something, we certainly can put it on our agenda to discuss. But at this point, we have not discussed it as a board.
Other questions for Mr. Coleman?
I just,
Mr. Peterson.
Well, since you're a police officer on campus, do you think this will make the campus safer or less safe?
I don't know that it's as simple of an answer as that. I will not presuppose that there's not already guns on the campus in many points, including people probably carrying them concealed. And if the operative word concealed, if you're very good at it, you wouldn't know. The issue beyond that is if an event were to happen, and I should probably stipulate when an event like we've seen across our country and across the world happen on any of the campus properties, the issue for first responders is you're going to a report of shots fired, person with a gun. And if you've got 100 people on campus with guns, and you've got 100 targets potentially getting engaged by the police, and in a perfect world, everybody would be trained and they would know what to do. And quite frankly, we're lacking in that, particularly if there's no requirement to, as the states, saw fit, that we can't require an actual program that educates members of the public that if you're carrying concealed and if you engage, here's the law, here's what, when you can use deadly force, here's when you can't. The carry concealed weapon permit allowed that, and the city of Anchorage had such a requirement until the state with infinite wisdom decided to go otherwise and reserve it its own judgment. I personally believe in the education side of it, and fitting that we talk about it being on an education institution, the UAA and or the schools. When I was going to school in the 70s, we had kids carrying long rifle 22s on the bus. No ammunition, but carrying rifles. We shot 22 long rifles in riflery courses. We taught hunter education. We had NRA courses in schools. I carried a buck knife folding sheets on my belt. These things would get you expelled in this day and age. And it's unfortunate, but this is the world we're living in. So I think that it needs to be spoken to from within our community because someone from Fairbanks has decided that their legislative aide is concerned about not being able to carry because the law says you can on a university. I think we should probably address it as both the school district, because I believe you'll have a direct impact, and certainly as a community. So that's my opinion, and I just brought it up since we're here.
Thank you. Doesn't appear to be another discussion on this item. Going back to the agenda, we're now down to members' comments. Anybody want to make any comments about anything we've discussed? My only comment to you guys, have you planned for what happens if the bonds don't go forward? I would just like to know what your plans are, write it. I want to know, because we've got to have a bill page that tells us if it doesn't go forward, what's going to be the result.
For that, Mr. Training, our needs are not gonna go away, and those are conversations we're having about what the next steps will be. And I don't wanna presuppose that the bond is gonna do anything other than pass, so I think there's a balance of how we think about that, and how we communicate that as well.
Well, after the election day, let us know, okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Comments from, yes, Pam?
Yes, I just want to make an announcement, an invitation since we're talking about bonds, and Mr. Higgins brought up CTE, Career and Technical Education, there will be a grand opening of the West and the Romick CTE facilities on March 31st at 6 p.m. And you'll have an opportunity to see how bond money has, I think, been well spent. For those who aren't aware, in the new West facility, there are 3 career pathways are in the health field, in the digital media, and in a brand new career pathway offered in the Anchorage School District, which is process industries. All 3 of these, of course, have direct tie-in to our labor market and potential employment opportunities if students continue in those fields of study. And then in the Romick, and they have reconfigured some of the existing space for their digital media, which to some extent does articulate with the West program, and then also their culinary arts program and their applied tech, what we used to call shop in the old days, but much more sophisticated for this century. It also has some new facilities, so you're welcome to come see. Students will be participating in the tour giving on the 31st of March at 6 p.m.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? Yes, Mr. Holden.
This will be my last meeting of the joint board. Doesn't mean I won't drop in from time to time. So I sincerely have appreciated all of the dialogue that we had. I fully appreciated having joint meetings as often as we possibly can. And I'm sorry that work schedule, since I started back at work full time, has kept me from all of it. But I'm glad I made today, and I wish you all well in making these decisions that are very important to our community going forward without me. And I hope that I've added something positive, towards that effort, and not necessarily been the old anchor that you had to drag along. So thank you very much.
Other comments from members? Mr. Higgins?
We went through some reviews and training and all with staff, with board, and we've got to remain focused on academics. And I remember growing up in Louisiana, the expression that don't forget that your goal is to drain the swamp while you've got other problems. And I say that only because all the discussion today has really been focused on the financial issues that we're challenged with. But our goal has got to be beyond that, and our goal has got to remain focused on academic growth. We've got some real challenges ahead of us. We're way out there on the academic achievement gap, where we're at the bottom where we should be. We've got, the growth is not there. So while we're struggling with the finances, I just encourage you to realize that I hope, administration and the board has got to remain focused on the academic component of it. The goal here is the students being successful. I appreciate Tam's comments about the career technology opening, because that's critical to providing that opportunity between career and college ready options that are out there. But somewhere along here, just to make sure everybody's aware of it, we've got to wait from that discussion about academics, and we've got to get back to it. And the legislature tells us count on this, count on that, so you can get focused on academics, and then we're being pulled back into a discussion. What are we going to do if we don't get the money? What are we going to do if we don't get this? And it's frustrating, but I just mention that only because we're not in here engaged in that discussion as well. It's all based upon the finance only, and that's unfortunate. Thank you.
Okay. We're now down to the agenda. We're going to go to audience participation for a few minutes. It's on our schedule. Like I said, we've got the school district budget coming in front of us on Tuesday. We can only affect the full dollar amount, increase it or reduce it. We cannot adjust individual programs. Because sometimes we have people say, well, take this program, I'd rather this program. We can't do that. We can affect the full dollar amount. Now, the way the law works is the school district, 30 days after they submit their budget to us, we either pass it or it becomes law automatically. Because some people are saying, well, just don't approve the budget. That's not an option, because otherwise it becomes law automatically. So with that, I'll open up to anybody who wants to talk about any item. Go ahead, Reverend. We'll let the Reverend go first.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a serious question. And we're laying off 49 teachers. What does that do to our vision of elevating those children that are below standard, 60%? And I'm concerned about that.
Thank you, Reverend. Yes, sir.
My name's Mike Bronson. I'm a volunteer with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People here in town. Even take my word for that. I'm here with Reverend Green, Miss Green, and two Mrs. Green. We would like to ask the Assembly's support on what we consider a very important issue this week. But let me preface by saying that we're proud of our school district. We like our IB programs and our buses and our beautiful schools and pools. We're proud of our school district. We're not above asking the school board to make some tough decisions. And this week is one example of that. Mr. Honeman asked for ratios. You can kind of see the benchmarks. Ms. Johnson asked for some thoughts about how to respond to the public. What we've been asking recently from the school board is to take a second look at a couple of small, modest portions of the preliminary budget, particularly their plan to eliminate 50 or so teaching positions and then a dozen or more positions in the classrooms. Because we feel that those positions are key to our concern. What's our concern? Our concern is that when we look at the data that we see under the standards-based assessments over the last few years, the performance on the part of our school children in this city has been flat under the old SBA. Under the new Alaska measures of progress, it's low. So if we're taking it at face value, we see the performance of our kids in this school district, and I'm thinking of high level, 48,000, not slicing and dicing. It's low and flat. So we feel, because we've looked at Charlotte, Tampa, and Boston, and some other school districts that have many of the same problems we do. They've been able to raise themselves up dramatically when it comes to literacy among their kids. They're poor, they're brown, they're abused, they're illiterate, and yet those school districts have figured out how to raise those kids up. One way they did it, not the only way, one way they did it, besides a lot of parental contributions, went out of their way to beef up their teacher corps. Think of it as an army again. They have an army of teachers, and what do we want them to be? Big army, well-trained. So that's what we're asking the school board to take a look. Take this preliminary budget back for a week or so, move the walnuts around a little bit. I'm sure out of their $500 million a year general fund and their $770 million a year overall fund, they could find a way to free up to $5 million it takes to save those 50 teaching positions. That'll get us a concrete step in the direction of raising up the literacy of these kids. Now, a little bit of background. So we talked about a half a dozen or 10 principals in the last few weeks in the 6 worst performing elementary schools in the city. And we've learned directly from the principals that a couple things, that the pre-K efforts at their schools make a big difference. Those kids come into kindergarten much better prepared, as poorly as they came in the door to preschool. And then we've also learned that those principals take really seriously this response to instruction, which is the school district's effort to raise up literacy of kids, but they're hurting for teachers. They have a really anemic, I'll call it an anemic pool of teachers to pick from. So in the classroom, helping these kids learn to read, often for the first time, our interns, retired teachers, we're glad they're there, but they're way underprepared and understaffed. So what we're asking the Assembly to do is, when you get the preliminary budget before you, is have a conversation with the school board and ask the school board to reconsider those small aspects of their budget. Thank you.
So your time is up. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anybody else wish to testify on any item? Seeing no one, we're done with that. We're now moving down to schedule for an upcoming meeting. The next meeting is on June 10th at 10 to 12 o'clock. The Education Center. We're now down to adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Is there a second? We're adjourned. Thanks for being